big transitions can be extremely dangerous. And that's, I think, what we saw with the shift to organic farming. A good ultimate goal, but done in a way that that was extremely subject to being brittle. So,
yeah.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Casio. I really appreciate your concept of VUCA and BANI and their power in explaining many situations, especially in business. But what will happen here? Situation is really like crisis in foreign energy. And then likewise it move into this we call this Dr. Casio can focus, and if I rather move hereafter. If you put the current scenario in economics in the frame of can you make bit more on that?
Dr. Manoj, could you repeat what she said, because there was a lot of disruption in my audio from her, and so I couldn't quite understand what she was asking.
Yeah, even it was not clear to me, Professor Tusa, his line was kind of breaking. Professor Tusa, the last part we didn't really get you. The last question, the question you raised.
Maybe I just let me type, because I know my connection is not that much.
All right. Okay. Right. So he will send us.
Until I type, you may move on. I just type the question in the chat.
Right. Perfect.
Okay.
So taking the discussion of future, further now. Now Professor Kumar mentioned a very important thing about saying that this is not an overnight issue, right? It has been developing for a long time, right? So we have another expert joining with us today, Dr. Pragit Veeratunga, who is a financial expert, and he has studied the change of the government fiscal policies and the financial policies. So I'm inviting Dr. Pragit to share a couple of minutes to elucidate us on what's your observation about the changing of the government policies, maybe from the end of 2000, from 2010, from the end of the Sri Lankan war period.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj, and thank you, Dr. Casio. Actually, I'm not expert in finance and economics. Yes, I'm a little bit curious about what is going on in Sri Lanka. And yes, I completely agree with what Dr. Casio said about transparency and what do you call about transparency, but you have talked about transparency in individual and institutional level. But to address the current problem in Sri Lanka, we need to look at this resilient and transparency from taking the country as whole, right? But having, like, for example, say, as an individual, if I'm trying to be resilient and be transparent, I might not be succeed, because when the whole system is collapsed, the whole system is corrupted, and there is no any resilient in the whole system. And I think I understood correctly when you were mentioning about resilient. To be resilient, we need to have extra resources, slacks, right? But as an institution, as an individual, or as a country, we might not be able to keep extra resources or extra, as you said, slacks, but we might have a way of keeping this slack not just as a product, as you said, extra medicine or extra equipment or extra material, extra fertilizer, but we can keep a good reserve, foreign reserve, right? When we have enough reserve in the country, So when the situation go wrong, we might be able to use that reserve and bring the resources that we require. So what happened in Sri Lanka was, in 2019, actually, we had a little amount of reserve, that is about 7.6 billion US dollars. But when you compare it with other countries, now, for example, recently I read an article about Singapore. So they have a reserve of 200 billion US dollars. They can quickly access 200 billion. And they have another 200 or 300 billion invested in elsewhere. They cannot access to that reserve quickly, but like taking a little time, they can convert into a liquid reserve. So the country is a very small country with a population of 6.5. I'm talking about Singapore, 6.5 population, but they have a reserve of nearly 500, 600 billion US dollars. But in Sri Lanka, we have a population of 22 million nearly, and we had a reserve of 7.6 billion in 2019. Yes, actually, that reserve is enough just to save the day, right? That is enough if the foreign reserve coming in as usual, because we had a foreign inbound tourism, and we have some remittances from the foreign workers, and we have some foreign income from exports, especially garments, right? So if we have those income, so we could have maintained the foreign reserve at that level, somewhere around 7 to 5 billion. So with that reserve, so we could have solved the situations in Sri Lanka. But what happened was, a Sri Lankan government, the previous government, I would say, the previous government, they took certain, I would say, short-sighted decisions. And as the previous professor rightly said, this problem is not just a sudden problem. This problem is rooted in the socio-economic and political landscape that prevail in Sri Lanka following the independence. We did not have, we didn't have enough sources to earn foreign revenue, right? So all the recurrent problems were solved by taking loans, and there were so many projects that we invested, but there is no any output that we expected. So there are so many problems. Overconsumption, and there are so many problems in Sri Lanka. So sooner or later, we were expecting the situation that what we are currently experiencing. But with the COVID pandemic, of course, that was a main factor that turned the economic upside down. That is not only for Sri Lanka, but entire world. But the impact of COVID-19, I think, intensified by these short-sighted decisions that were made by the previous government. So one of the decisions that the government took was a tax cut. So with that tax cut, there was a colossal loss of income. Like it's around 600 billion Sri Lankan rupees, not dollar, Sri Lankan rupees. So that's 600 billion is almost equal to the 70% of government servant salary. 70%, because in Sri Lanka we have 1.4 to 1.5 government servants, government employees. So we have to pay their salaries around 800 billion Sri Lankan rupees. So if that tax cut were not there, we could have covered up 70% of the government employees' salary. So that's one other thing I see in that tax cut. It is not only necessary, but also there is no any effect, because we didn't see any clear benefits to the middle class people or the low income class people. There's no benefits. So those benefits were taken by some of the 5%, 10% business people, I think. So there is no effect. That was unnecessary, and at the same time, government lost its revenue around 600 billion rupees. So that's one thing. The other one is, fixing exchange rate at 200. So in order to maintain that exchange rate, government pumped $1 billion. I mean, we had 7.6 billion, but out of 7.6 billion, they had to pump nearly $5 billion just to keep the rate fixed. So that was another decision that government took. So I'm not going to continue because this is your time. So the resilient, in my point of view, the resilient needed to be there at the aggregated level, in the government level, and the government needs to have a transparency. So what is lacking in Sri Lanka? Individual, institution, private companies, they might have this resilient transparency and everything, but when the entire system is collapsing, when the ship is sinking, one person or two person might not be able to save their life. So that's what I understood.
No, and that is very much my understanding based on what I've read, and I thank you for that detailed description, because it's very illustrative. What it shows me is that the crisis in Sri Lanka had deep roots, and that's actually very true for all of the big, seemingly brittle problems and changes around the world. Everything that seems really sudden actually nearly always has some very deep, very long time lead up. Has very long time elements that lead to this problem. But the crisis in Sri Lanka was the term in American English is the perfect storm. It was a combination of factors that each of them was a challenge. The tax cut was very challenging. The shift in farming was a challenge. The global pandemic was a massive issue. Each one of those would have posed a real problem for the government and for the society. But each one, in each individual case, the government and the society probably could very likely have come up with steps to take to make things function again. It might have taken some time. There might have been problems along the way, but each one of those was, if not solvable, there were at least responses that were possible. The combination isn't just an addition. They don't just add to each other, they multiply each other. Each one makes the other one worse. And each one can, and then a couple of them can make another one much worse. It just ends up being this extraordinary storm of problems. So it's the financial crisis, and which had been a long time coming, and then it hits it. It'd been a long time coming for many observers. For day-to-day people, it can seem like a really sudden shift, a real sudden change. Why does the value of the rupee collapse, or why does why do the prices suddenly jump? It's not a gradual change for people who are experiencing it. It's a sudden change. And so when I talk about these being a sudden shift, it's very much in the sense of how are people experiencing it, not necessarily the origin. You have each of these problems that become extremely difficult to respond to, because the resources you may have that would let you respond to a certain problem are damaged by this other problem. And so I have a great, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, really. I mean, this is something that you have lived through, that you are currently experiencing. But what I'm getting at is, when I think about the brittle systems, and you're absolutely right, Dr. Parker, you're absolutely right to talk about this in terms of a system level. When I think about these brittle systems, it's the question arises, how do you come up with a resilient response, a transparent response, an empathetic or insightful response to a system where all of the components coming from different directions you're falling apart into all sorts of directions. one thing to think about, and in the writing I've done about resilience, the research I've done about resilience, it's sometimes it's frustrating, but it's important to remember that the buildup of capacity, resilient capacity, is not an overnight process. It is just like all of these crises had a long lead time. They weren't sudden. Neither can the buildup of resilience be a sudden thing. I know that I sound like some arrogant American coming in and saying, you just need to be resilient. You need to have some slack in your system. And I'm really not trying to do that. What I'm trying to say is that as you are working through the solutions, working through your responses to these issues, the concept of resilience, of transparency, needs to be part of how you view your choices. Does this make us, does this choice, which may make things better in the short term, does it actually give us better ability to respond in the future? Do the steps that we necessarily take, whether they're political choices or economic choices, decisions about whether to take a loan, whether to do a soft default, all of these issues, you need to look through them not just through, does this solve the problem now, or does this lessen the problem now, but does it make things, does it have the potential to make things worse in the future, or does it have the ability to help us, continue helping us in the months and years to come? So that's the thing about BANI. BANI doesn't explain anything. BANI is a lens through which you can understand the system behind the system. How do the components combine that led to this particular crisis, that led to the crisis, the political crisis in the United States, or to the big crisis in Europe right now around energy and Ukraine. None of these things are sudden from the perspective of how we got here. Many of them are sudden from the perspective of how we experience them. The use of BANI then is as a way of saying, okay, recognizing the complexity, recognizing the uncertainty and the volatility around it, recognizing the VUCA parts, how do we respond? We respond through seeing, how do we make sure that we don't make things more brittle? How do we make sure that we are not increasing the anxiety of our citizens? How can we make sure that people understand what we're doing? And so when I said at the outset that I could definitely see that BANI was a useful framing, a useful lens through which to understand what's happening in Sri Lanka, I wasn't saying that BANI explains everything. What I'm saying is that BANI gives me a language and a structure through which I can see how these different problems could combine and lead to the outcomes that they have.
Doctor, sorry for the interruption. Pragit here.
No, please.
Yeah, you explained that from the BANI framework, there's two concepts, brittle and anxious is, applicable into Sri Lankan context. So what about...
Let me just very quickly clarify. I think that all four, including nonlinear and incomprehensible, are also applicable. It's just it struck me that brittle and anxious were the most glaring, had the clearest connection. But please go on.
Yeah, I feel like, as you said, the nonlinear concept is also applicable to Sri Lankan context, because now, unlike in normal situation, we cannot see a linear relationship, cause and effect relationship in the macroeconomic value. Now, for example, central bank has, devising different policies to battle against the different problems. Dollar crises, and the inflation in the country. Now, for example, they are banning imports over and over, but we don't see the results, right? The other one is, they have recently increased interest rate to very high level, assuming that there will be a slowdown or there will be a decrease in the inflation, but we don't see. And every month we see the inflation increasing, because there is this linear relationship has, I feel like, vanished, and there is a non-linear relationship. With that, the incomprehensible come into play. With that non-linear relationship, we cannot understand what is really going on. Because sometimes I feel like some of the people, those who have, I would say rich people, the businessmen, they're trying to be resilient, but without the part of transparency. So that makes that intensify the ongoing problem in Sri Lanka. So what do you think?
I think you're right. One of the issues around nonlinearity is that it is often not just an action leads to a disproportionately large reaction. It's also that there is often a lag, a disconnection in time. So, you say that they raised interest rates with the intent of stopping or bringing down inflation, which is I know they're doing that in the United States too, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen immediately, and in fact, there may be time where in this case, inflation gets worse before it starts to get better. Or there are other factors driving the inflation that interest rates can't affect, that basically cause this greater and greater disconnect between the cause and effect, a disconnect in time. This has been very educational for me to see the connections of the points of connection of a crisis. Looking at what's happening in Sri Lanka is giving me a new appreciation of the challenges that arise from the lack of a reserve currency, or lack of sufficient reserves. The challenges that arise from having very little flexibility in the system, resilience in the system, and the challenge of how you get out of this hole, how you get out of this problem. You had a political crisis, you had COVID, foreign exchange issues, the tax cut, the fertilizer issue, issues around do you take loans, do you seek assistance, does the assistance, what are the conditions of the assistance from IMF or from China? What happened, what are the consequences of the invasion of Ukraine? That has been just massive, and nobody outside of the people who were following closely, nobody thought about that as an issue was going to be an issue for Sri Lanka or for Mexico or for Brazil. So you have this combination of factors that each one, the brittleness makes the anxiety worse, the nonlinearity makes the incomprehensibility worse. They all combine in a way to worsen each other, and that is the challenge of a BANI environment. It's very difficult to break out of that spiral, that downward spiral. And so what I hope that you folks can get out of the BANI lens is a greater recognition of the connections between issues, the underlying connection, and also how resolving one issue can have unexpected effects on the others. That you need to think about how does the response to the tax the tax cut? Do we increase it? Are the taxes returned? What are the consequences in terms of how people respond? How does that affect the other crises? The core concept of BANI is that all of these crises are interconnected, that we have this densely interconnected system that make it very difficult to just respond to one. And so the challenge for any organization, leadership, country, is trying to balance your responses in a way that you don't worsen one problem while pushing back against another. I'm looking at the comments in the chat.
In fact, Jamais, let's welcome Professor Vijay Kulkarni joining with us from Pune, India. He's from the D.Y. Patil University, director and a senior professor. So, Dr. Vijay, what do you think? We like to hear the Indian perspective of the Sri Lankan crisis, and where are we standing in your eye, and where we should be going?
Dr. Manoj, it is indeed my pleasure and honor to join this, and I am really, overwhelmed to listen to all the contributors who have put forth their views. And James Casio has given maybe say the BANI framework, but apart from him, other two contributors, they have excellently tried to put forth their views and analyze that what could be the probable reason as far as the present situation is a concern, or maybe say the crisis are a concern. What I gather and what I realize, maybe say, through the discussion and maybe say based on little what I have heard through maybe say electronic media and otherwise. Basically, as you know, it is a worldwide known fact that when it comes to any kind of crisis, and that too in any country for that matter, the crises are called as a crisis because it is very difficult to maybe say control when they are behind your control in itself. And there are going to be different factors. There is a term which is called as a pestle, and I'm sure that all the dignitaries, they are aware about the fact that pestle stands for political, economical, social, and socio-cultural. When all these things, they are going to behind your control, then it is likely that a crisis are behind your control. There are certain things which need to be analyzed and assessed when it comes to maybe say the political scenario as such. But we are academicians, right? And we don't have any political control as such when it comes to the decisions which are taken by government. However, we are trying to understand and analyze that what might have gone wrong and how it could have been prevented. That is what we are trying to understand largely in the framework. And that is where VUCA, or maybe say, to be very precise, the BANI framework, how it can be used. And can we try and put maybe say the things what we are easily available and what are easily observed by us, in the framework and analyze. One more point I would like to put forth, Dr. Manoj, that see, when it comes to any country, and to be very precise, when it comes to Sri Lanka, as I have stated in my the chat message, that it is a tourism reliant economy, largely tourism reliant economy, like maybe say few other countries. I'm not naming few other countries, but there are countries who are largely based on this. And when it comes to the tourism, you can say that tourism and hospitality, all it was collapsed because of the crisis. And if we try and understand why this crisis have happened, or why this crisis have faced, or why Sri Lankan the community is facing this crisis, then I am of the opinion that certain decisions, which were taken by maybe say then the government, and no matters which government it is, but they were they were kind of say populist decisions. And when populist decisions are taken, it is likely to affect your maybe say the economy. And once you start affecting your economy, naturally, the cycle of managing economy itself is going to hamper and it collapses. So the reduction of taxes was one of the reason which is largely seen. And apart from that, maybe say one more thing was already discussed, which is related to the agriculture and maybe say banning certain things or maybe say banning imports on other things. But simultaneously, there is again, we have also seen that the repayment of loan was also, a challenge when it comes to the paying the debts. Even if you look at our own home and I'm drawing say 10,000 rupees per month, when my expenses are incurred more than what my income is, then it is going to be imbalance. And then how to make those expenses become challenge. But over and above, I am of the opinion that populist decisions and tax cuts was were the few reasons. And what I see, maybe say from those maybe say the crisis situation or maybe say the situation which was arrived. I am saying that even Sri Lankan government is trying to come out of it. Uh, Even they are taking required measures, I would say, and sure the day will come that again Sri Lanka will be back to its beauty. And with this, I conclude my maybe say thoughts and ideas and views. Though I am not economist, all of sudden whatever has stuck to my mind, I have tried to put forth. Thank you, Dr. Manoj, for giving me an opportunity, and I wholeheartedly congratulate you and your team for organizing such a wonderful webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Vijay Kulkarni, joining with us from D.Y. Patil University, Pune, India. And very much taken your comments, and it definitely brought value to our webinar. And there's another question I received actually when I was communicating about this webinar with my colleagues, Dr. Jamai. Now, you have experienced a federal government shutdown at the end of 2018, and it was there for about 2 months, if I'm correct. And now in Sri Lanka, we faced lots of lockdowns, not the shutdowns. So, I mean, what is it like government shutdown? We haven't faced it so far. Oh, I don't know whether we are going to step into that level. Please.
It's it wasn't as bad as people were threatening it to be, because there is a weird element of the American political system that is extremely we are divided into two groups, and it's very hard to break out of this two group some variety of technical reasons. The government shutdown in 2018, 2019 was as much a political play. It was an attempt by one political party to push the action of another, saying, we're going to do this, we're going to hurt everybody if you don't agree to our demands. That's pretty much what it boiled down to. Because we had so much discussion before the eventual shutdown about what the consequences could be, many people took steps to mitigate the risks. If they needed to have certain actions done, they had to renew their passport. They did that early because they knew there was a possibility that the Department of State would shut down and they wouldn't be able to do anything with the passport. Whatever steps they could take beforehand, they tried to mitigate. They tried to mitigate what they saw as potential problems. But for me, when I think about the lockdown, it's not so much that there was a collapse in services, because remember, in the United States, we have 50 different subunits, 50 states in the country that each has their own strong political government. That so many of the services that in other places that the country provides are provided by the state, the subunit in the U.S. And so there wasn't as much overall risk for the everyday people for a short couple of months shutdown as there might be in other places where so many of the services provided by the government come from the central government. I don't want to minimize the risks, the dangers that arise from a shutdown of government services, but the United States is probably a bad case study, not a useful example because of how peculiar, how strange our systems are in so many ways.
So it was basically politically motivated, and it was a tug of war between the Democrats and the Republicans, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah. And because of the way that we do primary voting before an election, so that each party votes internally, the Republicans have become very radicalized. Basically, the most extreme parts of the party have been the most active voters. So they end up voting in more extreme people into positions of power, which just increases the split between the two. And you end up with someone, like a Trump, like a Ron DeSantis in Florida, as people who have find that they gain more power by being more extreme. And by, if they can make the other people hurt, then they have succeeded. And that's a really strange perspective to have on being a political leader, if you can make the other side hurt. But that seems to be a recurring theme. I'm not that optimistic about the United States right now. I think there are some really big issues that we are refusing to face, and there are people who have some power who are actively working against the success of the entire country. And on top of, just to make sure I mention, on top of all of this, there is the accelerating climate crisis. The potential is that in the next decade we may see another meter of sea level rise if a certain set of glaciers melt into the ocean in Greenland, in Antarctica. How would a meter of sea level rise affect Sri Lanka? What are the resources? What are the communities that are right on the coast that might be affected? One of the things that happens when you have a sea level rise isn't just that the level goes up steadily, it's that it makes storm surges worse. So when you have a typhoon, when you have a cyclone in the Indian Ocean, when you have a major storm that causes flooding, the flooding gets even worse. And so one thing to keep in the back of your head as you think through, how do we respond as a nation? How do we respond as a people to these sets of crises, to the crisis around finance, to the crisis around agriculture, taxation, politics, is how do we make sure that our responses help us to be able to respond, help strengthen us with regards to this massive global issue that keeps getting worse and worse and worse, that no one country can control. The United States, China, Sri Lanka, no one country can stop global warming. It has to be everybody working together. And that's, as we know, very difficult. So that for me is, when you look at the issues around tourism, when you look at the issues around populism, these are critical, but there is this other context that needs to frame all of this. And BANI for me is a way of articulating some of the crises around climate, but ultimately the focus that you need to have as you think through how do we as Sri Lanka, how do we deal with this combination of problems? The focus needs to be as much on how do we reduce the impact of future problems? How do we protect ourselves against future problems as it is with how do we resolve our present problem? And that's a difficult thing. I don't want to make it sound like it's going to be easy or obvious. It's a challenge, but it is the challenge of the 21st century. Is how do we deal with our present day issues in a way that strengthens us for the problems to come, especially around climate. Now, I am aware of the scheduling, the timing of all of this. I know that it's just past 9 p.m. for you.
It is like 9:15. So I think we are moving into the latter part of our webinar, our discussion. It has been growing very informatively, and I'm inviting my other colleagues. If you have any final comments or the questions, we can put them on the table and discuss around it. If there's anyone else.
I would like to make a final comment, because we will be stopping this session within 15 to 20 minutes, right? So the thing is, what I understood, that as a Sri Lankan, and especially not us actually, policymakers and lawmakers, they need to have this holistic perspective. And as you said, we should not, we need to look at the problem which are in Sri Lanka, and the problem in, the global problem as well. Now, for example, there's a brutal war in Russia and Ukraine, and some people think that is 6,000 or 7,000 kilometers away, or we should not worry about it. There is no any effect on us. And the global warming is another issue. And people, I don't think 99% of Sri Lankan have any idea about what might be the effect of global warming and what are the contribution of the global warming to the current problem. Now, we know recently India has banned exporting wheat, right? So that's a very big problem. And we know the Ukraine is in the seventh, I think. They are the people who producing wheat, and the Ukraine has totally stopped, I think, exporting wheat. And we can see the effect in Sri Lanka, because now in Sri Lanka, it costs us like half a day's salary for small snack, right? Half a day's salary for a small snack, just eating small bun and having a tea, cost us half a day salary. So that these are the effects of this global scale problem. But the problem is, this is very unfortunate situation. The lawmakers, the policymakers, I would say politicians, who are the higher people in the top who make the decision, they do not have this holistic perspective. They look at only a signal as one single problem. They think the problem is only the fuel, only the gas, only the few essentials. So they try to find solution for this few problem without devising strategies to tackle this the widespread problem. So that's the major concern, because we can't have any expectation that these people will have this perspective, this holistic perspective. They will understand the global scale problem, and they will combine it with the Sri Lankan problem, and then they devise the short-term and long-term strategies to tackle this problem. So that's one side. The other side is, when we going back to our previous concept, resilient and transparency. Now, I'm not sure how to put this. Now people have a belief that problems are being resolving, but people don't understand. We have a kind of a temporary relief because we are paying loans. We are like a bankrupt state. Now, for this year alone, we have 7 billion installment to pay, but we are not going to pay, and we did not pay in the previous part of the first part of the year. So that is why we feel a small relief in the country. We feel, I mean, now a couple of months back, there were mile-long queues and shortage and riots and everywhere, but now the situation is a bit calm. And at the same time, people think that we have secured a small loan facility. I would say, I'm saying it's small because compared to the problem we have, because the Sri Lankan economy kind of has contracted by 30%, because back in 2018, our GDP was around 87 billion, but the estimated GDP this year is around 72 billion. That means nearly we have lost around 20 billion. That is almost 20% to 30% of Sri Lankan economy. The economy has contracted. So economic contraction is not just reducing the GDP, it has collapsed businesses, it has turned upside down the economy, and people will lose job, and the quality of life will decrease, and there will be a unseen problem, psychological problem. People are killing each other. I mean, we see there are so many accidents because people are with this like anxious, as you said. We can put that into the BANI concept, right? Now they're giving us, the IMF giving us just 2.89 billion, a small package of loan. So do you think that would we be able to build up a resilience with that a small chunk of money when it compared with the bigger problem that we are facing in Sri Lanka as of now?
No.
Simple as that.
Just to be very specific with your question, no, I don't think that that small chunk of money will by itself be enough to build your resilience, but it will certainly help you start the process. You'll notice that over the course of this hour, as we've spoken, I have been very careful not to use the term solve a problem. I've always said respond to a problem, because when you deal with this kind of absolute chaos, as you deal with this kind of combination of crises, you're not really looking at how do you solve these problems, because these problems, many of them can't be solved by any one actor or any one country. You can, however, respond. You can look at how do we mitigate the harm? How do we reduce the long-term damage? What are the things that we can do to make this problem not as bad? Listening to your description of the state of the crisis, I'm both sad and in awe. Sad that the recognition of just how much risk and how much fear and anxiety there must be in Sri Lanka right now about the state of the world, about the state of the country, about how do people live. And in awe, because what I see is, in many respects, the critical part of a resilient society. What I'm seeing are people who are paying attention, people who are looking for new ways of seeing the problems, people who are looking at better pathways to resolution, pathways to respond to these issues, and not just doing the same thing over and over again, because they've come to recognize that doing the same thing over and over again isn't working. And so I'm really impressed at how conscious the folks I'm meeting here today seem to be about the complexity of the problems that you face, and the need for complex strategic responses as a result. It is, I wish that I could give you answers. Wish that anyone could give you answers. What I think I can help with, or what I think BANI helps with, is allowing you to ask questions in a better way, allow you to ask the kinds of questions that really get to the underlying drivers. Sri Lanka cannot separate itself from the system, from the global systems, whether they're ecological or economic or political. And as a result, it needs to think through how can it best survive and thrive in a global environment of chaos. And it is right now in the midst of a truly chaotic period because of this combination of pandemic and Ukraine war and financial issues and loans and debt traps and all of these things happening in combination. And so as much as it is in the midst of this combination of crises, it needs to be thinking about what is the right combination of responses. We can't just, as Dr. Prageeth says, we can't just look at our leaders just can't look at one crisis at a time. You need to be looking at what can we do that gives us breadth, that gives us scope, that lets us see how to respond to more than one thing at a time. And it's definitely not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. It is, however, from my perspective, I think it is within your capacity. This is something that's not impossible. It will be difficult, but not impossible. And I really look forward to paying very close attention to the evolution of Sri Lanka over the next decade.
Right. Thank you very much for that. The final inputs, Jamais. Actually, now we as an academic institution, it's our both social and the moral obligation to find out new avenues, new ways to take the country forward and to provide the empirical solutions for the present economic crisis. That's why we are testing, we are hypothesizing different perspectives, including the BANI, but without forgetting VUCA, right? So in comparative terms, and we are trying out different models. And thank you very much for making your contributions here today. I hope you have gathered ample data, some materials to make your plenary speech. We are really looking forward to have that speech, a short speech. So and that will be actually sent to the government policymakers and the high-level authorities here in Sri Lanka. So perhaps with your ideologies, we might be able to see some light in the darkness that we are going through. So my dear participants, today we started talking about the Sri Lankan economic crisis at the lenses of the BANI world, and we invited Dr. Jamai Cascio, an anthropologist and a futurist and an author from the United States, and he went more than the time that we requested him, and thank you very much. And under a challenging health condition, and we really appreciate it. And the things that we discussed today with respect to the brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and the incomprehensible, and we really look forward to articulate them in a kind of a systematic way and to provide the solutions to the present crisis. And we also touched upon the important economic, social, and the environmental aspects that contribute for the present economic crisis in Sri Lanka, not to mention the climatic changes and the sea level rising, and which will be some burning disasters in the years to come. Also, we have opportunities like tourism industry, like apparel industry, like the export agriculture, that again need to be focused and that need to be again aligned according to the international demand, right? So that we will be able to make or bring some good dollars back to the country. I also right, apart from thanking our esteemed invitee, Dr. Jamai Cascio, I also wish to thank the Vice Chancellor of Rajarata University of Sri Lanka, Professor Sanjeevani Ginigadara, for giving us necessary strengths to conduct the international events like this, and also the Dean of the Faculty of Management Studies, Professor Bandula Jayatilaka, and the chair of the, he's also the chair of the International Research Symposium on Management. And Sir, thank you very much, sir, for joining with us today, and also all of the professors and the senior academic members of the faculty and of the university. And I pass my special thanks to the conference, the symposium co-chair, Dr. Sandhya Kumari, who joined with us today and giving us the necessary support and encouragement to take this action forward, our endeavor forward. And equally, I thank both the secretaries of the International Research Symposium on Management, Mrs. Senani Gamage and Mrs. Edina Wilgers, and importantly, the students and all other attendees to the webinar. I hope you all enjoyed the time with us by attending to the webinar. So with that, I conclude the webinar of the day, the economic crisis of Sri Lanka through the lenses of BANI, world. And thank you very much, Jamais, again for joining here with us. Looking forward to see you soon.
Yes, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very, very happy to have been invited to be part of this in this webinar and be part of this symposium. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.